2025 was a huge year for Overwatch, and I don't think it's crazy to say that it's the best year the game has had since its launch in 2016. With the additions of perks, stadium, map voting, hero bans, and more, Overwatch feels like it's truly trending in a positive direction for the first time in years. But in order to conserve the momentum that Overwatch has right now, the game is going to have another huge year. In this video, I'll try to break down what my ideal 2026 looks like for Overwatch, including changes they could make, features they could add, and most importantly, trying to figure out what the big core gameplay shakeup will be that's supposedly right around the corner. Quick disclaimer before we start. Everything I'm going to say in this video is my own opinion, and if you don't like it, the good news for you is that I don't work for the Overwatch dev team, so any change I propose will likely never see the light of day. And secondly, keep in mind that I'll pretty much only be discussing changes or additions that affect Overwatch's core competitive game mode. I won't be covering things like Stadium or the Battle Pass, because frankly, I don't care too much about those things, and I'm certainly not well versed enough in those topics to talk about them at length. So without further ado, let's break down how Overwatch could look in 2026. So supposedly we're getting another big gameplay shakeup in 2026. This would be in line with a series of shakeups the devs have released every year, starting with the Season 9 changes in 2024, which saw an overhaul of the HP system and projectile sizes, and of course in 2025 we got perks, which I think have overall been a success in terms of adding more depth to the heroes. But in 2026, the devs have confirmed that the shakeup will be even bigger than the last two. So what could it be? I have a couple of ideas. Let's start with team-ups. God, I hope it's not team-ups. Obviously, team-ups are the signature mechanic of Marvel Rivals, where two or more heroes can be picked in tandem with each other and receive special abilities. The idea gained some traction when Blizzard tried it out in this year's special Halloween event, Haunted Masquerade. The limited time mode was not very popular or well received, and additionally, I just think team-ups would be bad for the game. I never loved them in Marvel Rivals. It's a novel idea, it sounds like it could be a lot of fun. But for the sake of competitive integrity, relying on random teammates to pick the right hero to give you the team-ups is not it. And honestly, I think perks did a better job of adding choice and variety to the heroes. I just don't think we need team-ups at the moment. Or ever. Speaking of perks, what if they receive some changes in 2026? Specifically, I was thinking of a third tier of perks called Ultimate Perks. So on top of your major and minor perks you already get, you would have the option of a third perk which could change how you use your ultimate. Obviously there's already a few ultimate based perks in the game, but this tier would give the player two distinct options on how they would like to use their ults. For example, with Ashe, she could have a perk that lets Bob follow her around instead of being stationary, or a perk that lets Bob do critical damage to targets lit on fire from Ashe's dynamite. Something like this could be interesting and would give more depth to perks and ultimates, but ultimately, no pun intended, this wouldn't really be a big enough change for 2026. I wouldn't mind if this was something they added in the future, but I think we need to give perks time to grow by themselves before complicating the system any further. So if team-ups lead to a toxic rank system and upgrading perks feels too minor, then what could a big gameplay shakeup in the following months actually look like? It's actually pretty hard to come up with new or overhauled systems for the game right now, but I think I might have landed on something. Take everything I'm about to say with a grain of salt. I spent days trying to come up with something, anything that would be both novel for the current player base and could develop over time into a fully fleshed out system. I call my idea dual roles. Essentially, certain heroes in the game would be playable in two different roles, obviously with similar but modified kits to fit their new role. Imagine you load up into a normal game of role queue, and instead of Doomfist being locked to the tank player, with dual roles, both tank and DPS players could pick Doomfist. If the tank player picks Doomfist, he would play as he normally does, but if a DPS player picked Doomfist, he would have his kit rebalanced to fit the role, with nerfed HP and replacing his block with, I don't know, maybe an uppercut or something? Now, do I want DPS Doomfist back in the game? Not particularly, but for the sake of example, I'm using him here. But think about the possibilities. You could have support Torbjorn with a healing turret, or DPS Alari who can detonate her pylon by shooting it. There's truly so many different directions you could push the system in, and it would allow the dev team to conjure up new ideas for existing heroes in the same vein as perks. The dev team has said that they like to tease upcoming gameplay shakeup changes ahead of time, like how last year's Junkenstein's lab game mode already had the bones of perks and stadium built into it. So, has my system of dual roles been tested by the devs? Not really, but put your conspiracy caps on and take a walk with me. Do you remember earlier in the year when Bastion's model size was reduced? And then the same thing happened with Lifeweaver just a couple months later? In the past, the dev team has mentioned how changing model sizes was not as easy as the public seems to think it is. But with both of these changes coming in the span of a few months, it makes me think that perhaps the devs have a new system in place specifically to change hero model sizes. And if dual roles or a system like it is something they're working on, then changing model sizes, specifically for tanks, would be really important. Though this begs the question, would dual roles be good for the game? I'm not totally sure, but I don't think it would be a complete disaster. This system would allow players to pick heroes from roles they don't normally play. I love playing Junker Queen, but I don't play tank that often. If there was a fleshed out DPS version of Junker Queen in the game, I might have a new main. There's a couple of obvious holes in this system, like how it works in open queue, mystery heroes, custom games, etc. Also, scaled up or scaled down versions of existing heroes might look really weird. Like imagine a larger Mei. Lore-wise, and even just visually, things could get very strange. This system would be scary, it would be substantial, but it might also be super cool. If you guys have any ideas of what the big gameplay shakeup could be in 2026, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'd love to see what you guys think. Now, when I was initially writing this script, I was going to mention how hero reworks were my most anticipated change for 2026. But in the most recent dev update, they confirmed that they're currently working on reworks for the new year. For me, this is really exciting. When Overwatch 2 dropped, it came with a slate of hero reworks to fit the new format, and this is something I was hoping they would continue to do as the game aged. Why add new heroes to the game when so many of the existing designs are dysfunctional, toxic, or just downright stupid? Unfortunately, it feels like the devs just messed around with Sombra and Cass's flashbang for a while, and just kinda gave up. So this latest announcement gives me a lot of hope, but also a lot of anxiety. Importantly, there are two heroes I would prefer if the dev team ignored altogether. Those being Roadhog and Sombra. This might just be a personal thing, but these heroes have received so many iterations over the years, and yet I wouldn't say either of these heroes have ever been in a particularly healthy spot. Roadhog and Sombra have intrinsically toxic choke points within their kits that are unfortunately tied to their hero identity. Invis, Hack, and Hook are part of these heroes' kits, and making healthy versions of these abilities is extremely difficult. Obviously, these heroes deserve to be looked at in the future at some point, but for the time being, I would rather the devs focus on giving some love to certain heroes who have felt neglected for a long time. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to give detailed suggestions for how a specific hero could be reworked, and then mention some others that could use some retooling. Essentially, I'm going to lay out a framework for how I think reworks should look, and touch on a variety of heroes without getting into specifics, so that this video isn't 10 hours long. Even if you play Overwatch every single day, there's a good chance that you've completely forgotten about Junkrat. Despite this hero being in the game since launch, and despite him having an iconic character design, Junkrat's pick rate is pretty abysmal, and he's been terrible competitively for as long as I can remember. Junkrat has dodged a rework for years, and I think it's about time he receives some changes. Junkrat's issue is that his skill floor, or barrier to entry, is far too high, especially considering his limited skill ceiling. At a high level, Junkrat doesn't participate in teamfights like other heroes do. He can't really hold an angle, he can't move around the map without being punished, and he's way too inconsistent and one-note to be viable in 99% of situations. Most top Junkrat players rely on crazy rollouts and one-shot combos to squeeze any sort of value out of this hero, and the mechanical requirement to make those kind of plays happen is ridiculous when you consider how many heroes get value for doing less. I think Overwatch could look to an old friend for inspiration on how to rework Junkrat. If you've ever played TF2, you know that the Demo Man is one of the most prolific classes in the game, and I think the Overwatch dev team could take some pointers from him. Firstly, his gun sucks. Even with the buffs, even with the perk, Junkrat's projectiles are too slow and too inconsistent. The obvious change here would be to change the arc of his grenades to be more streamlined and consistent, while also tuning his damage numbers accordingly. Secondly, Junkrat's mobility is horrible. Sure, he can cross large gaps or gain verticality pretty easily, but the trajectory that his conch mines send him in is way too slow and telegraphed. I think letting Junkrat trade some verticality for quicker horizontal movement would give him far more options and make him infinitely more versatile. Ideally, the flight path that conch mines sends Junkrat in would change depending on if he jumped before exploding or not, letting the player choose how they want to approach their mobility. Finally, and maybe most importantly for this rework, Steel Trap needs to go. This is an ancient ability that no longer works in the current state of the game. The only way you actually get yourself stuck in a Junkrat trap is through inattention, and this makes Trap this really boring attention check minigame that more often than not results in the trap being broken and Junkrat receiving no value. There are a bunch of different ways you could go about replacing Trap, but I'm gonna propose some sort of melee hit ability. Perhaps like a spiked baseball bat to fit the Junker aesthetic. It could be some sort of AoE damage around Junkrat that does more damage closer to the center and would be a core element of his new one-shot combo, allowing the player to conserve their conch mines mainly for movement. So that's the rework I most want to see, but there are other heroes that could use some love in the new year. Ramatra is so cool in terms of character design, voice lines, lore, but when it comes to his kit, he's so boring. Ramatra mostly looks to cycle cooldowns and sustain himself on the front line for as long as possible, but I think he could be so much more. I imagine a version of Ramatra that can switch between forms at will, with advantages and drawbacks to both, making him a true stance-changing hero and actually living up to his name as a tempo tank. I reckon Blizzard is scared to make big changes to Mercy, and for good reason. She's one of the most popular heroes in the game, with one of the most devoted player bases. Yet, I think at this point, even the Mercy players themselves would be open to the hero receiving changes. I don't have too many ideas for Mercy, but I imagine a redesign that emphasizes her movement and healing, while rolling back damage boost to try to de-incentivize her hard pocket playstyle, which is a massive choke point for the hero. Also, a rework to Valk would be greatly appreciated. Zenyatta needs something. It's hard to think of a redesign for Zen which maintains his unique playstyle while also giving him more options. The big drawback of Zen is his terrible survivability, and while that should always be a weakness of the hero, the mobility and burst creep of Overwatch 2 has left the monk behind. Maybe he needs better perks, or more HP, but a retooling of his kit shouldn't be off the table completely. Other heroes like Moira, Hanzo, Lifeweaver, and more could all use some fundamental changes to their kits, but I'm gonna cut this section off here in the interest of time. All in all, hero reworks are very intriguing, and there's lots of room for growth and a variety of kits. Honestly, if the big gameplay shakeup of 2026 just ends up being a slate of hero reworks, I'd be fine with that. If we received 4 or 5 substantial reworks in one update, the game might feel super fresh and new again, but I understand that the dev team is probably working on something bigger. I also wanted to talk about some additional things I'd like to see in 2026 that don't directly impact gameplay. Firstly, let's get the obvious out of the way. We need an Overwatch animated series, and we've been needing it for years. There is just so much untapped potential with Overwatch's lore and characters that it almost feels inevitable. There were rumors of an Overwatch Netflix show being in production a few years back, so it's definitely something Blizzard has considered before. And what better time to produce an Overwatch show than during the game's 10-year anniversary? And of course, we've seen how successful video game adaptations have been in the last few years. Look at what Arcane did for League of Legends and what the Cyberpunk show did for that game. Even if I'm not a big Overwatch lore guy, I would still absolutely watch and likely enjoy the show, as would many of you, I imagine. I don't think I'd even expect the show to come out in 2026, but an announcement of an upcoming series would be enough to satisfy that itch for now. As for in-game features, I've been desperately wanting a tournament client in Overwatch for years now. I was a huge fan of Valorant's Premier Mode when it came out, and I think something similar would do well in Overwatch. They kinda tried a system like this a while back with Faceit integration, but that requires you to use an external program, and nobody's gonna do that. Having a tournament system built into the game that separates teams into divisions tiered by rank would be super exciting. And it could even feed into OWCS or Faceit League at the top level. And finally, we desperately need more esports content in the game. 2025 saw solid viewership for OWCS across the year, and a lot of really cool overarching storylines reach their apex. What even is the point of partner teams if the team bundles are so limited? I find it absurd that I can watch Quartz dominate the World Finals, but I can't go into the game and buy a Twisted Mind Sojourn skin. Evidently, we need partner team skins for every hero, but I'd also like to see an esports tab on the homepage where you could read up on players and teams, and even look at the upcoming schedule. And that's pretty much it. Obviously, we still need smaller changes, the leaderboard needs to be fixed, there are some needed balancing adjustments, but I wanted to look at bigger, broader changes the game could receive this year. If you have any ideas for how Overwatch could advance in 2026, please let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and I'm curious to see what you guys think. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe, as it would help me out a lot and I'd massively appreciate it. Next video will probably come out in like 2028, so see you then. My name is Nice. Thank you for watching.